Welcome to the Thinking Stack.
Great to be here.
Today, we're starting something a bit ambitious, actually. Part 1 of a multi-part exploration focusing on Kashmir.
That's right. And we're using our integrated thinking stack, or IDS framework, to guide us.
So this first phase, what are we calling it?
We're calling this Layer 1 Cognitive Cleanse.
Cognitive cleanse.
But the idea basically is to build a really clear, unbiased foundation of facts. Try to clear out the myths, the preconceived ideas, the moral judgments for now.
Sort of like vacuuming the room before you start decorating?
Exactly. Get rid of the dust that clouds understanding. Our ITS approach means breaking things down, and this first layer, the cleanse, is all about assumptions aside, look at the basics.
Okay, and we have quite a bit to work with for this foundational layer. Historical accounts, records. There's a colonial-era white paper on Indian states from 1950.
Legal documents, too, like the instrument of accession itself.
Right, and UN Resolution, Security Council Resolution 47 is a Kai one from April 48.
Plus government gazettes, war diaries, reports from human rights groups like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International.
Academic views, and even more recent reports on things like casualties and the economic situation.
It's a broad range.
And this step, laying out these facts, feels crucial because, well, the narrative around Kashmir is just so complex, so contested.
Absolutely. By trying to establish some agreed-upon historical points, some baseline statistics, we hope to give you, the listener, a solid place to start for the layers that come next.
Okay, so let's unpack this history of rule first. It seems Kashmir was governed by various outside powers for a really long time. Mughals, Afghans, Sikhs, then the Dogra dynasty.
Yeah.
The white paper mentions about 500 years.
It's a significant period, yeah, 5 centuries.
That's a long stretch of, well, external rule, isn't it?
It is. And I think what's interesting there, or relevant perhaps, is how that long history provides context for later discussions about self-determination.
How so?
Well, when a place has been governed by one outside group after another for so long, it sort of raises questions, doesn't it? Questions about the historical agency, the political voice of the people actually living there.
Okay. Then we get to 1846, a really major shift. The British sell Kashmir to Gulab Singh for 7.5 million rupees.
That's the documented event.
And this establishes the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir under the Dogra dynasty, selling a whole territory, people included. It just raises such fundamental questions about sovereignty, ownership.
It certainly does. I mean, think about it. This transaction happens under colonial power. Can you legitimately buy and sell a land and its people? It's a core question.
And this 1846 event, it's key because it brought in this non-native dynasty ruling over a population that was predominantly Muslim.
Right. And that dynamic has had really long-lasting repercussions, as we'll see.
Okay, fast forward about a century. August 1947. British rule ends. India and Pakistan gain independence. But the Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir, Hari Singh, he initially decides not to join either one.
He hesitated, stood apart at first.
What do you think was behind that? Was he hoping for independence? Or just maybe playing for time?
It's hard to know his exact thinking, of course, but it was a time of huge geopolitical upheaval. His hesitation created this vacuum, this period of uncertainty.
And that uncertainty perhaps created openings for others.
It certainly presented opportunities for different groups, different interests, to try and shape the region's future.
Then things escalate. October 1947, Pashtun tribesmen arrive from Pakistan, starting around October 22nd.
Yeah, this is another really contested point.
Right. The historical accounts just diverge completely here. Pakistan tends to call them volunteers, while Indian records, archives, they label it a Pak-backed invasion.
It's a stark difference in language.
Why do you think the narratives are so different there?
Well, it really highlights how historical events get framed through, national perspectives. Often that framing serves to justify later actions or claims. Understanding those differing interpretations is pretty crucial.
So, amidst this developing situation, this incursion, Maharaja Hari Singh signs the instrument of accession to India. That's October 26, 1947.
Correct.
And India responds very quickly, airlifting troops in the very next day, October 27th. So India's military involvement was directly tied to that tribal entry and the Maharaja asking for help.
That's the sequence, yes. But, and this is a big but, the legal status, the circumstances around the signing of that instrument of accession, they've been disputed right from the very start.
How so?
Well, Pakistan rejected its legitimacy immediately, and apparently even a U.S. legal advisor at the time, Noel Baker, described the situation as murky.
Murky. That doesn't sound very solid.
No. The debate often centers on the conditions was it signed under duress, and what level of autonomy was actually agreed upon. If your foundational legal document is questioned from day one,
then everything built on it becomes shaky too.
exactly, it has massive implications for all the later claims and counterclaims.
Okay, so after the accession, India takes the issue to the United Nations.
Yes, which leads to UN Security Council Resolution 47 in April 1948.
And this resolution, it proposed a process, right? A sequence of steps.
That's right, a three-step process. First, Pakistan was supposed to withdraw its tribesmen and nationals.
Okay, step 1, withdrawal.
Step 2, India would then progressively reduce its own forces to the minimum needed for law and order.
Step 2, Indian troop reduction.
And then step 3, after those first two were done, a plebiscite would be held under UN auspices, a free and impartial vote for the people to decide their future.
But crucially, that plebiscite, step 3, it was dependent on steps 1 and 2 happening first.
Yes, explicitly sequential. The resolution aimed to create the right conditions for a fair vote, but it was absolutely tied to Pakistan's withdrawal and India's troop reduction happening beforehand.
And, well, we know what happened. Or rather, what didn't happen. That first step, the complete withdrawal by Pakistan.
It was never fully implemented, according to the UN commissions at the time.
And because step 1 didn't happen?
Just steps 2 and 3, including the plebiscite, never occurred.
So this left Kashmir in this kind of limbo state, claimed by India based on the accession.
But with this unresolved UN-mandated question of self-determination hanging over it.
The non-implementation basically froze the situation, didn't it?
It did. It created a status quo where both sides could, and still do, argue their case based on their reading of the resolution and what happened or didn't happen on the ground.
Okay, let's quickly walk through the major events that followed. We have the first India-Pakistan War in 1947-48.
Right, which ended with a ceasefire line monitored by the UN. That's documented in, for example, the Indian government's war diaries.
And that line later gets a new name.
Yes, after the subsequent wars in 1965 and 1971, the Simla Agreement renamed it the Line of Control, the Law C.
And that agreement essentially formalized the Law C as the de facto border, even if not internationally recognized as such.
Correct. These conflicts really just cemented the physical division of the territory.
Then moving forward quite a bit, 1989 sees the start of a major armed insurgency in the Indian-administered part.
A very significant and tragic phase.
And here, the numbers, the casualty figures, they vary wildly. The South Asia Terrorism Portal, looking back in 2024, estimates around 47,000 deaths related to the conflict since '89.
Okay.
But then you have much earlier report, Human Rights Watch in 1999, which spoke of figures possibly upwards of 100,000, even back then.
Wow, that's a huge difference. More than double.
It is. What could possibly account for such a massive discrepancy? Is it just the difficulty of counting in a conflict zone?
That's certainly part of it. Collecting reliable data during active conflict with access issues, verification problems. It's incredibly difficult.
And maybe political motivations too.
Potentially. Different groups, different organizations, they might have different ways of counting, different definitions of conflict-related death, different mandates. It makes comparing figures very, very tricky.
Okay, then 1999, we have the Kargil conflict.
Yes, a more localized but very serious conflict fought at high altitude along the Law Sea, widely reported at the time.
Though geographically limited, it showed how volatile things remained.
Absolutely. It demonstrated the continued risk of military flare-ups.
Then, much more recently, August 5th, 2019, a huge constitutional shift.
A landmark date, definitely.
The Indian government revokes Article 370 and Article 35A of its constitution. These had granted special status, some autonomy, to Jammu and Kashmir.
Done through presidential orders, CO 272 and 273, documented in the official government gazette.
And alongside that, the state itself was bifurcated, split into two union territories, Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh.
A fundamental change to the region's relationship with the Indian state.
When we're just trying to establish foundational facts, what's the most crucial aspect of that event to grasp?
I think for this layer 1, the key is the unilateral nature of the change by the central government and the fact that it removed that previously held special status and statehood. It altered the constitutional framework significantly.
And tragically, the instability continues. Just recently, April 22nd, 2025, reports of a militant attack in Pahalgam.
Yes, resulting in the reported deaths of 26 tourists.
It's a terrible reminder that despite the big constitutional changes, the conflict, the violence, it's still ongoing.
It highlights that the underlying issues driving the conflict haven't necessarily been resolved by those changes.
Let's circle back to the numbers for a moment, particularly the death tolls. That huge gap, 47,000 versus potentially over 100,000. It really does underscore how statistics themselves can become part of the battleground, used to support different narratives.
Absolutely. It's vital to approach any figures from conflict zones critically. Ask how they were gathered, by whom, what definition is being used. The presentation of data is rarely neutral.
And beyond the deaths, there's the mental health toll. Medicine Sans Frontiers, MSF, did a survey back in 2010.
Yes, I remember that.
It found that 45% of adults in the Kashmir Valley showed symptoms of serious psychological distress.
45%, that's nearly half the adult population.
And they noted it was higher than levels seen in other major conflict zones they worked in, like Gaza or Afghanistan at the time.
That points to an immense, almost invisible layer of suffering. The human cost goes so far beyond just the physical casualties.
What are the likely long-term effects of that kind of widespread trauma in a society?
Oh, they can be profound and last for generations. Impacts on social trust, community cohesion, economic productivity, family life. The ripple effects are enormous.
And speaking of economics, there are figures on financial losses too. The Kashmir Chamber of Commerce and Industry, KCCI, estimated losses post-August 2019.
Right, following the Article 370 revocation and the subsequent lockdowns and disruptions.
The estimates they gave range quite a bit, somewhere between 40,000 crore and 85,000 crore rupees. That's roughly 5 to 10 billion US dollars, maybe more.
And the range depends partly on how much you factor in the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, which overlapped.
But either way, it's a massive economic hit.
Huge setbacks for livelihoods, for development, for people's daily lives and future prospects in the region.
So with all this complex information, contested figures, historical debates, how do we navigate the sources themselves? It seems vital to understand potential biases.
It's absolutely critical. No source is perfectly neutral. Recognizing the potential tilt is key.
So, for example, you might have sources reflecting an Indian nationalist perspective, like, say, press releases from the Ministry of Home Affairs or broadcasts on Doordarshan.
Yes, those would likely frame events in line with a national narrative, emphasizing security concerns, integration perhaps. You need to be aware of that viewpoint.
And conversely, you'd expect Pakistani nationalist sources, maybe dossiers from their Ministry of Information, official statements to present a very different picture.
Definitely. Likely focusing on self-determination, allegations of human rights abuses by India, the historical claim to the territory, perhaps through an Islamic nationalist lens.
Then you have international human rights organizations, HRW, Amnesty, the UN Human Rights Office, OHCHR.
Their focus is generally through a liberal rights framework. They document alleged abuses, call for accountability, often focusing on the impact on civilians.
And their bias, if you want to call it that, would be towards that rights-based perspective.
You could say their methodology and mandate inherently lead them to prioritize those aspects, which is valuable, but it's still a specific lens.
What about news wires, Reuters, AP?
They typically aim for a more centrist institutional approach, striving for objectivity, reporting verifiable facts, often quoting official sources from different sides.
But even they make choices about what to cover and how to frame it.
Of course. Editorial decisions, source selection, neutrality is an aspiration, rarely a perfect reality.
And finally, academic sources. Books and articles from university presses like Cambridge or Harvard.
Academics generally aim for rigor within their specific discipline: history, political science, law. They use peer-reviewed, detailed evidence, theoretical frameworks. Their bias might be towards a particular academic theory or interpretation, but usually explained transparently.
So the takeaway here isn't to dismiss sources, but to understand their perspective, their potential tilt.
Exactly. Knowing the likely perspective helps you, the listener, read between the lines, compare accounts, and build a more rounded picture. It's about informed consumption of information.
Because getting bogged down in arguing about the facts or using biased facts stops any real discussion about solutions, about peace, about the future.
Precisely. You need that solid, shared as possible factual base to have any meaningful ethical or political conversation later.
It's like trying to debug software, isn't it? You have to agree on what the bugs are before you can even think about fixing them.
That's a great analogy. You have to log the issues first, acknowledge the complexities based on the evidence.
So for this initial layer, this cognitive cleanse, we've sort of identified maybe 7 key, largely undisputed factual pins on the map.
That sounds about right. Foundational points.
Okay. 1, the 1846 sale creating the Dogra-ruled princely state.
Yep.
2. The 1947 Instrument of Accession, signed amid the tribal incursion. 3. The UN resolution calling for a plebiscite that never happened because the conditions weren't. Crucial point. 4. The three major Indo-Pak Wars, 1947-48, 1965-1971, shaping the line of control.
Got it.
5. The eruption of armed insurgency starting around 1989.
Yes.
6. The 2019 revocation of Article 370 and 35A and the reorganization of the state.
Okay.
And 7. The persistence of violence, like the recent 2025 Pahalgam attack.
Those 7 points cover major turning points and realities. Most subsequent arguments and narratives, they kind of build on or react to these foundational events and facts.
So as we wrap up this first layer of our exploration into Kashmir, the aim was really just to clear the ground a bit. Look at some core historical moments, some key figures, contested documents, the human cost reflected in different ways.
And this step, even though it seems like just laying out facts, it's often where the disagreements really start, isn't it? Getting tangled in different versions of these basics.
Right. So by focusing on establishing these core elements, hopefully, we've given you a slightly more stable platform to stand on as we move into the deeper complexities.
We hope so, because the next layers in our integrated thinking stack will definitely start unpacking the more intricate narratives, the interpretations, the deeper issues.
But for now, maybe just consider this. Holding these foundational points in mind, the sale, the accession, the unresolved plebiscite, the wars, the insurgency, the recent changes, the ongoing violence, what new questions does that raise for you about why this situation persists and where it might go?